Okay, this is the Arturia MiniFreak. Now, you might recall that I am not a digital synth guy. I'm more of a vintage analog guy, but here I am doing the MiniFreak. And why? As you might also recall, I did the MicroFreak as a demonstration, and I was so in love with it that I've continued to say it's one of my favorite synthesizers because it really does do a lot of cool things that fill a lot of my own needs and probably the needs of other people. And I've also used the MicroFreak to like fill out the polyphony on my Matrix root. Great synth. I wanted Arturia to make a bigger version of the MicroFreak, and they did. Here it is. So I am going to go through the functionality present on the MiniFreak, and we're going to start off with oscillators. And then, of course, as you might recall, the oscillator section has a wide variety of digital oscillator types. So I'm going to go through them and hopefully shed some light on them, and maybe show you a few things that can be done with them because they're really full featured. To have all of these different oscillator types in such a small, compact, and affordable package is it's a cool thing. So let's dive in. We're going to start off with the first oscillator type, which is here. Let's look at it. Basic waves, and we've got a sine wave there to show us. These are just really basic electronic waveforms that you can use. And, but it's not just like, oh, here's a square or a triangle or whatever. You know, there's some more functionality buried in here that will allow you to do a lot of things that it would take a lot of different sections in an analog synthesizer to do. So we're already diving into the benefits of digital synthesis, which I never thought I'd be celebrating, but here we are. Okay, so number one, basic waves. Our first knob, of course, these orange knobs are the controls for the different oscillator types. So when you start cranking on them, you're always going to get some interesting outcome, which is another great thing about the design of this synth. First, we have the wave, which in the context of basic waves is called morph. And it starts off at about 50%, which gives us a sawtooth wave. And it goes up pretty high, so we also can go downward. And, you know, let's right off the bat, we're experiencing polyphony here because the MiniFreak, unlike the MicroFreak, is primarily a polyphonic synth. So, yeah, as I demonstrate these different oscillator types, I'm going to be playing chords more often than perhaps I would have when I was demonstrating the MicroFreak. I don't remember. But anyway, we have a nice range of oscillator sound. So if you take the wave knob, which is morph in the context of basic waves oscillator, and you drop it down to 0, you have a square wave. Of course, you have a good range. Very low. So you might be wondering, okay, we heard 50% and 0%. So what exists between 50% and 0%? Well, that is a morph, which is why the wave knob is called morph within the context of basic waves, because you've got a waveform that's morphing between waveforms. So your square wave at 0% that turns into a sawtooth at 50%, between 0 and 50%, you have the morphing of the waveform. So let's hear that. In between there, you have some unholy conglomeration of a square wave and a sawtooth. So you're basically creating a new wave that you can use as the basis of this oscillator setting. Or if you wanted to, you can modulate it with the great modular patching section and get some sort of effect like this, which is kind of a filter effect because you're taking a waveform and you're altering that waveform. You're taking harmonics out or putting harmonics in, which is basically a filter function. So you can get filter type effects with these oscillators before you even get to a filter, which is really, really cool. And don't forget, you don't have to settle for a good old sine wave just being like, although that does sound good. You could put an envelope on there and get a transient attack where it starts off a sawtooth and goes to a square wave on every note, which is a cool thing. I'm just going to do it with the knob because I don't have to patch anything if I just turn the knob, but I'm just trying to give you the idea. You can do things more than just get some wavy modulation going on there. So you might wonder what is happening in the morph section above 50%. Well, it's some sort of sawtooth doubling that results in a sawtooth an octave higher than the sawtooth that's at 50%. Which, you can either use just as a basic octave shift, so that you don't have to mess around with these, and you can get higher with these, as I will show you, or you can do more interesting things. But first, let's hear sort of the range of this oscillator. This one goes way higher, actually right out of my hearing range. Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys. It sucks getting old. Okay. I can still kind of hear it. I can kind of hear it. Even though it's an octave up, it still goes pretty low. So that is that. And of course, you can do the same modulation tricks that you were doing before, because between 50% and 100%, you have different waveforms. In fact, you have kind of an octave doubling almost there. Not almost, that's full-on octave doubling. So at about 75%, you have what the shape knob is going to do, adding an octave higher instead of an octave lower, which you can use to really fill out your sound. Or, of course, you can use modulations, which sounds pretty cool. All right, let us get back to somewhere around 50%. Okay, so this is our sawtooth. If we move on to the timbre knob, which is called sin in this, the context of this oscillator setting, we're not really getting any effect at all. But that's fine, because to get an effect, you can go down, take the wave knob and go down, which is our morph, to 0, where we have a square wave. And then all of a sudden your timbre knob as sim gives you pulse width modulation. And the cool thing about it is that it's the kind of pulse width modulation where it doesn't go completely to 0 or complete to 100%, so you don't have any audio dropout. So if you then take the wave or morph and put it up into that doubled octave sawtooth thingy, it's then something that sounds like pulse width modulation, but is actually some sort of phasing between two different sawtooth waves, but it ends up sounding the same or similar. Very nice. And our last knob in this oscillator section is sub. It adds a sub bass. So you can really, fill out your basses, because if you've got a bass going and then you add a lower octave at the same time, it certainly fills it out. Really cool, but also keep in mind, and I'm going to be saying these tips kind of throughout the thing because it's kind of my deal, but if you're a person who wants to emulate analog synthesizers, having a sub octave, which is basically the same oscillator, an octave down, it's not like a second oscillator, it's right perfectly in tune with the first oscillator and does only what the first oscillator does. But still, you can use it if you use it lightly to really fill out a chord, to really fill out the oscillator sound so that it doesn't have sort of that digital, I don't know which word to use. But listen. Certainly if we add it full on, you get this big muddy thing. But if you add just a little bit, you can go from this to this. It doesn't sound like there is, some big, huge, nightmarish octave chord playing down below. It just fills out the chord that you're actually playing. So we're just talking about the most basic of oscillators here, one that provides you with a sawtooth and a square, but somehow with the functionality that's there is a lot of possibility, and obviously with your patching ability, you can really exploit those various aspects to make relatively complex outcomes from something that's just a square wave or a sawtooth wave generator. And this is only one of many oscillator settings, and that's one of the reasons that the whole MiniFreak architecture amazes me, is because it's you've got so much power. And it's great sounding. And, and these knobs, which are for settings, you can also use them like you'd use a filter cutoff knob and just crank on them to get cool sounds. Anyway, it is a great, it's like one of the simplest oscillator settings, and yet you can still get some great sounds out of it. That is the basic wave settings in the oscillators of the Arturia MiniFreak.